What's up, guys? Welcome back to Read and React. My name is Logan Campbell, and today we're going to be going over my running back tiers for the 2026 fantasy football season. Now, if you've never drafted with tiers before, basically the way it works is you go down the list of running backs. Typically, you try to look at, what guys are actually going to be drafted, but you can go as deep or as shallow as you want, and you basically group them into tiers, obviously. But what you really want to look at here is, okay, in this range of players, would the guy in the last spot of a tier be someone you would possibly consider taking at the top of the tier? So we'll get into that and kind of the decisions I made around that. But basically, tiers are just a way to further divide players. And really what they're made for is so that you can see, okay, where's the big gaps between players? For example, the running back 5 and the running back 6 may only have 5 points, in difference in projection. And so, that might not be a very big gap. But the running back 10 to running back 11 could feel a lot worse than that. Like, you may go from a guy who you feel really good about as your RB1 to a guy who, maybe you're considering him for at most your RB2. So really what it is to identify the big gaps in ranks, and also just to make it easier to organize your players so that way you can get the maximum value out of each position. For example, if you're in the third round and let's say there's 5 tier 3 running backs left but only 2 tier 3 receivers, well, then you might want to take the receiver and wait for one of the running backs to get back to you, because the difference between those 5 is not that much. Whereas with the receiver, if you wait an extra round, you may end up with a tier 4 receiver. So like I said, once we're kind of looking at the tiers, it'll be a little bit easier to visualize, but that's kind of the basis around tier-based drafting. Is it allows you to really get the maximum positional value. And with running back specifically, it really helps you identify the different stages of the draft and kind of give you a roadmap of, okay, I want to have this, at this point, I want to have 2 running backs, or I want to have one guy from this tier, one guy from this tier, and then one guy from this tier. Like, it really helps visualize the different stages and, the guys who you may feel really good about, really bad about, your lottery tickets, your dead zone, whatever it may be. It just really gives you some clarity into the stages of the draft, which make it a lot less intimidating when you're starting your draft. So with that, let's get right into my tiers. We're going to start with tier 1. So this is a software that I built just to organize tiers and rank players. So ignore these overall rankings on the left. I'll be doing a full rankings breakdown next week. This is also my Superflex rankings. That's what my primary league is in, so that's the ones I've been working on first. But I'll get into my PPR rankings next week. But for now, just look at the tiers and also the positional rankings just to follow along. So like I said, Tier 1, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, to me, a very clear 2-man tier. They go 1-2 in most drafts. I don't really see any reason for that to change. Jahmyr Gibbs, being given the true workhorse role in Detroit now with David Montgomery gone. Bijan, kind of the same thing. They lost Tyler Algier, and he produced at a very high level last year. Both of these guys have finished top 10, I believe, the last 3 years, and really just project to grow their roles and come into that full-on breakout. Both these guys have RB1 upside. And I would say like a RB5 floor. You can even justify an RB3 floor. And I think that's what really separates tier 1 is these are the guys that, like, if they finish outside the top 3 to 5 of the position, it's a failed pick. I think the other guy you've seen in this range is Christian McCaffrey. I can't really get behind that. Again, the way I like to look at tiers in terms of who belongs in what tier is, would the last guy in a tier make just as much sense to take as the first guy, or can I even, maybe justify, taking that guy instead of the first guy? And to me, it's just not a conversation to be had with Christian McCaffrey. I think he has way more risk than these guys. He finished RB1 last year, had all that volume, really projects to regress, whereas both of these guys project to only grow from last season, which is what you really want to look for in fantasy football. So now, getting into tier 2, we have James Cook, Chase Brown, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, and Omarion Hampton. So with these guys, these are the guys who I think if they finish outside the top 10 at the position, you're really disappointed. But I think they also have top 3 upside. So that's what kind of separates that first tier to the second tier. I mean, obviously, if any of these guys finish below their ADP, it's not ideal. But in terms of what you are drafting them to be, you're drafting them to be your RB1, but they're not a guy that you are drafting necessarily expecting to be the RB1 overall. I mean, if they get there, great, but it's just not the reality. So this takes us to RBs 3 through 8, and I think if you get any one of these 8 running backs, you're set up for a very good fantasy draft. I think that these are all a clear cut above the rest. Once we get into tier 3, you'll kind of see there is a lot more risk involved with some of those picks. And one of my favorite guys in this range is Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown just projects to continue the pace that he's been on the last few years. He's coming off 2 top 10 finishes. The Bengals offense is really solid. And one of the best things about Chase Brown is he gets to that top, 5 to 8 range without needing crazy volume. I believe he only had like 270 carries last year, but because of the receiving work and because of just the scoring upside, he doesn't need to get 350 touches to reach top 5 like a lot of these other running backs. And I just think he's a really good PPR guy. He goes in the second round, so if you're able to get him as your second pick or possibly even your RB2, I think you're set up really well. Again, I have him at RB4. Again, it's with Christian McCaffrey, Taylor, and Achane. It really is just the risk factors for me. With McCaffrey, it's the injury, obviously. I mean, he's coming off over 400 carries, RB1 finish last year. Typically, we don't see RB1 repeat at a very high clip, so that's a major concern. Jonathan Taylor last year, he had just so much production when they were winning, but it's when they were losing that I'm really worried about it. There's like a 10 point per game difference between his points per game when they were winning games versus losing games. And then Devon Achane, it's really just the Dolphins offense doesn't project to be very good. All 3 of these guys can be very solid draft picks, and that's the thing is like just because they are ranked lower than maybe the ADP says or where their normal ranking is on your platform doesn't mean I think they're bad picks. It's just there are guys that I like more. Hampton, I would say, is kind of the cutoff of this range. And to me, what separates him from the rest of these guys is that he hasn't produced at that top, 5 to 10 level like the rest of these guys have. But I think he gets there this year. I think he's someone that we project to grow a lot. He showed last year in a very small sample that he can produce. It's just over a whole season, can he stay healthy? And can that Chargers offense really start humming? Overall, in tier 2, if you get any of these guys, I mean, if you don't have a top 2 pick, you're not getting Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs. So these are kind of the first guys that you can look at as like a truly elite running back, and they set you up really well for a hero running back or even a heavy running back build with 2 running backs in the first 2 or 3 rounds. I just love all of them. I think they all have a very strong case to finish top 3 at the position. And honestly, I would expect most of them to finish in the top 10, which is a really good thing to get in their first round. Gives you a nice safe floor to build your team around. Getting into tier 3 now, these are the guys that I think you feel okay about them being your RB1, but they're not guys that you're looking at to finish top 3 at the position. Realistically, their ceiling is more of a top 5 ceiling, and if they finish below, a high-end RB2, you're really disappointed, but ideally, you're still hoping for that RB1 finish. The ceiling just isn't as high, but they all have pretty good floors. So in this tier, we have Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Jeremiah Love, and Ashton Genty. Ashton Genty would have been in the tier above, but due to that injury, I just think you can't justify him in the same tier as some of those, elite guys that we project to finish top 3 when there's a possibility he might miss games at the beginning of the year. If there's re-injury risk or if the injury lingers throughout the year and his production is hampered because of that, you just have to move him down. So overall, these guys are ones that have a lot more risk factors. I mean, Saquon Barkley didn't have a great year last year. I do think he bounces back. It's just a matter of how strong he is getting up there in age. And so to me, we don't really know what we're going to get from the Eagles offense this year. I do think Saquon will end up being a good pick, but I don't think he's a guy that you're holding out for a top 3 finish from. I think if he gets to top 5, you're honestly thrilled about that. Derrick Henry, this has less to do with the possibility that he, this is the year we finally get the Derrick Henry injury, which might just be the worst bet in sports because this dude might just be immortal. But it's more so just his floor is really high, but his ceiling isn't. I mean, he doesn't catch a lot of passes, which in PPR is what we're looking for. So he is kind of capped out at like a top 5 to 8 finish, but I think with the floor, he's a guy that if you wait until the 3rd round to get your first running back, he can be a very, very solid RB1. And again, all these guys I think you're happy with as your RB1. They just are more of the floor plays as opposed to the high-end ceiling plays. Jeremiah Love, I honestly love as a prospect, love as a player. He projects to just get a ton of work. He's a very good receiver, very good runner. Is a little banged up right now, but hopefully he will be back before the start of the season. If he's not, I would probably move him down a tier, but for now, we're keeping him up here. It's really just the Cardinals offense. How many scoring opportunities is he going to have? How strong are they even going to be at getting him the ball and letting him run loose? Like, I could see him being in like an Ashton Genty situation where he's getting tons of volume, but he just can't do much with it because the offense is so bad. Plus, they still have Trey McBride. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson will have some sort of role, so I think Love is not in as much of a Genty role from last year, where Genty was the only guy on their offense besides Brock Bowers who got hurt for most of the year. Jeremiah Love will have a little bit of competition. They still have Tyler Algier, which for some reason means he's probably going to scalp like 10 touchdowns from Jeremiah Love. But overall, like, he's not a guy that I'm betting on a top 3 to 5 finish from. But historically, we have seen running backs taken in the top 10 picks finish as RB1s, so I project him on the lower end of that. I think if he gets to like RB6 through 8, you're really, really happy with that, and I think that would be an overperformance, but I do think he has a very, solid floor as like a top 15 running back with top 10 upside. Ashton Genty, like I said, he's only this low because of the injury. I think if he is fully healthy and plays the entire year, he has a ton of potential to, really break into that, top 10 floor, top 5 ceiling type of guys. I would say like him and Hampton would go back to back to me if he was fully healthy. But again, the injury just does introduce some risk there. So these are all guys that you're pretty happy with as your RB1, but you're not necessarily looking for them to finish as a top 3 player. Odds are if you get them, you probably have at least one solid receiver, if not 2, or a receiver and a tight end. So these guys aren't going to be your core production, but they will give you a solid floor to start building your running back room around. Moving into tier 4 here, this is where I think these are the guys that you're really happy with as your RB2. But if they're your RB1, you probably feel a little bit shaky. So this is a pretty small tier, and we'll explain why once we get into tier 5. But tier 4 is Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, and Javonte Williams. So RBs 13 through 16. So I know I just said high-end RB2s. Duh, it's RB 13 through 16. Like, that's quite literally what I'm ranking them as. But again, I just think that these are guys that you're not feeling great about as your RB1. I know some people feel differently about Kenneth Walker specifically, but to me, if you just look at him compared to like Genty, Love, Henry, and Saquon, I think that all of those guys, like if they finish top 10, you're not really surprised. Like that's what you drafted them to do. But to me, if Kenneth Walker finishes top 10, like that would be a little surprising. And if he finishes any higher than like top 8, like you just smashed on a pick, because Kenneth Walker has never finished that high in drafts. He's been in the league, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And I mean, he is a good running back. This is not an anti-Kenneth Walker player ranking. It's just in fantasy, he's never produced a solid RB1 season, which is where he's being drafted right now, which is why I'm lower than him. All of these guys above him, save Jeremiah Love, have either produced RB1 seasons or have given you reason to, project that they will. I mean, Love, Hampton, and like kind of Genty are the only ones that haven't. And even Genty was a low-end RB1 last year. Kenneth Walker has never reached that mark, and so to me, he does fall a tier below the guys who have. I think the people who are putting him top 8 are really setting themselves up to get screwed later in the year. I might be eating my words, but I would much rather be lower on a player like Kenneth Walker who's never produced than higher when I think that his range of outcomes is a lot wider than people realize. He has had injury risks, and the Chiefs now want to make him a bell cow. So will he even make it through the full year? How do we project the Chiefs' offense to realistically perform this year with Mahomes possibly injured? Just a lot of questions. And again, the biggest problem for me in terms of a tier-based ranking is Kenneth Walker has never produced an RB1 season in nearly 4 years. So for that, he just has to be lower than those guys, because I don't really see it happening this year in like the 5th year of his career. He could finish as like a low-end RB1, but again, you're drafting him as a high-end RB2, so that's well within the range of outcomes. Breece Hall, again, it's a bet against the offense. I mean, he is super talented. I've loved Breece Hall since he came into the league. I had him his first 2 years in fantasy, and he was awesome. Finished top 2 at the position his second year. But again, it's just the Jets, and you just can't put him much higher knowing how bad that offense could be. I mean, he could see 350 carries and still finish outside or 350 touches and still finish outside the RB1 tier, purely because the offense is so bad. So his scoring opportunities are limited. His efficiency, who knows? But I do think that he is one of those guys who I think could break into that next tier. But again, looking at the guys above him, you just can't put him up there knowing how bad the Jets offense could be. The only guy above him who I think has an offense that is even on the relative same level would be Ashton Genty, but Genty is just a little bit younger. We've seen him produce with the offense and it only got better coming into this year. But to me, Breece Hall is just kind of too risky to put in the RB1 conversation, but I think as an RB2, he's a phenomenal pick, and you feel great about him because of that possible upside. Kyren Williams and Javonte Williams, both are guys that are just more kind of the solid RB2 floor, not a lot of upside. They're kind of the Derrick Henry of RB2s, where you can't put them much higher because the odds of them finishing top 6 to 8 at the position are pretty low. Even the odds of them finishing as an RB1 aren't crazy high, but realistically, if they're fully healthy, they will finish top 15 at the position, which if you took a riskier RB1, or even if you need to take your first running back in this range, I think any of these guys are doable. It's just a little more sketchy than I think you'd like to see ideally. But Javonte and Kyren both, I think, give you a solid top 15 floor. Realistically, the highest I could see them getting is like RB10, so a low-end RB1. But if you're looking for safety, if you've maybe taken a risk on a guy like Malik Neighbors or Rashee Rice and need a safer RB2 option, I think both of these guys are great. I think with Breece Hall, you could kind of see the floor being a lot lower because we've seen that happen. Whereas with both of Kyren and Javonte, the offenses project to be very good. They're kind of in the opposite boat of Breece Hall, where Breece Hall is a very high upside, possibly very low downside pick because of the offensive quality of the Jets, whereas Kyren Williams and Javonte Williams are a little bit more boring. They're going to be within 3 spots of their ADP regardless, and so it just depends on what shot you want to take in this range. Next, we've got tier 5, and if there is a running back dead zone to be had in this draft, I would say it's this tier. As you can see, it's probably the biggest we've had so far, so let's get right into it. We have Cam Scadaboo, Bashal Tutin, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne Jr., DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Jadarian Price, and Quinshon Judkins. Now, none of these guys, I would say, I don't see a world where they produce well. I think that pretty much all of them you can make the upside case. I just think that these guys, in terms of what we profile as dead zone running backs, are probably the most likely candidates. So for those of you who don't know, the running back dead zone is kind of the point in the draft where you're drafting guys as possibly your running back 2 or even like your running back 1 in really dire situations, but that historically don't really pay off. So it's usually once you get to about running back 18 through running back 26 to 30, you really start to see a lack of value at the position because that's where the points get really close in terms of overall production. You're looking at guys that may be more inconsistent, that may not be getting you production week to week. They might get you 20 points one week, 5 the next week, just a lot of volatility there. And again, I just think that this is kind of the range where you start to see that. I mean, I would say, again, all these guys, you can see the case for them finishing top 15. You can also see the case for them finishing outside the top 30. Of the guys in this range, though, I do really love like Cam Scadaboo, Bashal Tutin, and Jadarian Price. I think those are the 3 guys that I think have the most upside in this range. And even Swift and Montgomery, I think, are both really solid floor plays. I think if you've built out your entire roster into a true hero running back build where you take a really early running back, fill the rest of your team, and then take your RB2, I think Montgomery or Swift both are good candidates for that because they'll give you a solid floor at RB2 production where you already have that kind of high upside at your running back 1. But a lot of these guys also have concerns. Bucky Irving just can't seem to stay healthy. What's his role really going to be? They brought in Kenny Gainwell to be the receiving back more than likely, and Sean Tucker continues to hemorrhage goal line carries from Bucky Irving. So I don't think Bucky Irving's role is super clear, and that's kind of my concern with him. Josh Jacobs, there's the legal issues, and I just think the Packers offense could be a lot more pass heavy this year, and I just think Josh Jacobs is getting to the point where he might begin to regress, and I think where you're really going to see that is the touchdown production, which has been where he's made his money the last couple of years. Travis Etienne Jr., I think with the Alvin Kamara injury, is truly a very intriguing pick, especially at your running back 2. I don't hate him, but I also think that with the Saints offense, again, being as pass heavy as it is, if Kamara still has a role when he's back, which we think he will, I could see him being a guy that finishes much lower. And then Quinshon Judkins, it's a combination of Brown's offense and lack of receiving upside. I think, to me, he's he's the epitome of a dead zone running back because he's a guy that has a very low floor but very limited upside. I think a lot of the other guys you look at, like Montgomery, Swift, and even HN Jr., I would say to a certain degree, have a very high floor but low upside. Or like Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Bashal Tootin, Cam Scadaboo, Jadarian Price all have a very high upside but also like low floor. So there's at least some benefit to drafting them. Quinshon Judkins, I just don't think you should ever take. I don't think he will provide much value to your team. I mean, the Browns aren't going to have a lot of scoring opportunities with Deshaun Watson or even Shadur Sanders at quarterback. Dylan Sampson tends to be more the receiving back, and Quinshon Judkins could easily be the guy who you see every week having like 20 carries for 70 yards and like one catch for 5. Like, he's a guy that you won't be shocked if he has 20 touches a week, but then still, like I said, finishes outside the top 20 at the position, which is just not what we like to project. If a guy's in a high volume role, he better be able to produce, and I just think that there's a chance that he doesn't, which is really concerning. So getting into what I would consider the last main tier, tier 6, this is the guys who, honestly, you're not expecting to start. You're hoping you never have to start them, but if one of them turns out, you're in a very good spot. So this one has a ton of names. This really just encapsulates like the latter quarter of the running back position, because I think for all of these guys, they all have fairly equal cases in terms of upside, but also in terms of downside. So starting at the top, we have Travion Henderson, Tony Pollard, Jonathan Brooks, Ramondre Stevenson, Jalen Warren, Rico Dowdle, Blake Corum, J.K. Dobbins, Kenny Gainwell, R.J. Harvey, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones Jr., and Chuba Hubbard. So RB 26 through 39, again, these are the guys that you're not drafting as starters, but if one of them turns out, it'll really help your team. There is kind of a mixture of the floor guys and still some ceiling guys in here. I think at the top of this tier, you can make the case that you're still in the dead zone. The difference here is that I think that by this point, you will pretty safely already have your 2 running backs, which the dead zone is typically where you're still drafting a guy that'll start. So as long as you are to your bench at this point, I think any of these guys is worth the shot. It really just depends on what you need. For example, like Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, J.K. Dobbins, and I would say like even Jordan Mason are kind of more the floor plays in this range. I think they're the guys that if you took some risks at running back and, maybe you took Jadarian Price and you're worried he's not going to start off super hot because he's a rookie. Maybe you take one of those guys to fill the gaps. Maybe you have a guy that like an Ashton Genty who's a little more injured like going into the season, and you need a guy who can give you just a few one-off weeks. I think that those are kind of the guys you're looking to take. More in the higher upside category, we have like Travion Henderson, Jonathan Brooks, I would say RJ Harvey just as a high upside, like very low floor player. Even Kenny Gainwell I would put into that tier, because to me all those guys are ones that you're really betting on a breakout, and that's where they'll be useful to your team. They're not guys that are going to average 11 points per game every week that you can plug in case of an injury. They're guys that are going to go, 22 points one week, 5 the next week, and if you start to see any consistent production from them, it'll probably be more on that higher end, and you've just won yourself a very solid starting running back or possible flex option. There's also guys that honestly are just in really ambiguous situations. That's Jalen Warren, Rico Dowdle, Bill Krosky-Merritt, and even, again, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, and even Chuba Hubbard to a certain degree. All those are guys that we don't really know what's going to happen with them. I mean, for Chuba Hubbard specifically, like they've said it'll be a split backfield, which to me already bodes poorly for Chuba Hubbard. If he's already not the starter in week 1, to me that means that Jonathan Brooks is already gaining ground. And for the rest of these guys, we just don't know what we're going to get. Warren has kind of, the Steelers have been hesitant to give him a true like RB1 bell cow role. Saw it with Kenny Gainwell last year, and they just brought in Rico Dowdle. Bill Krosky-Merritt, it's like, okay, how much rushing, how many carries is this guy even going to have with Jaden Daniels, with like Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason? Again, it's okay, Aaron Jones is the receiving upside, but he's getting old. Jordan Mason is the better runner, so what do they do there? And then there's also some high-value handcuffs in here, primarily Blake Corum, who, if Kyren Williams gets hurt, Blake Corum projects as like a top 12 running back. Like he pretty much fills where Kyren will be projected, and maybe even more so because he will probably be a bell cow. But even without Kyren Williams, I think he has the chance to really grow in his role this year and possibly give you some spike weeks with touchdowns, but you are primarily drafting him as a high-end handcuff. Overall in this range, you're looking to probably get 2 or 3 guys. I would say you want at least one guy that is kind of a more, high upside Hail Mary shot like a Trevo, a Jonathan Brooks, an RJ Harvey, even like even a Kenny Gainwell. And then I think you want at least one guy who is more of either the floor play or someone in more of an ambiguous backfield. Get a Tony Pollard or a Jordan Mason or a Bill Krosky-Merritt. Like any of those backfields with ambiguity where we don't know what's going to happen with them are really worth targeting, because if if it ends up being a bad backfield, you just drop the guy. But if they end up winning that job, you just got yourself a clear RB1 in like the 8th, 9th, 10th, even down to the 12th round. That can be really helpful to your team, and again, fill in for some of those injuries or bye weeks as needed. The true last tier of the draft is tier 7, and these guys are the true Hail Marys. You're probably only having to take like one of these guys, and realistically it's these top 10 to 12 guys, and realistically they're guys that you're taking in the last round of your draft. Just to point out some guys that I really like here, Keaton Mitchell, if he can carve out a role on this Chargers offense, I think can be very solid. Again, we project the Chargers offense to be very good, and so to me he could kind of see some decent production through an efficiency standpoint. Marshawn Lloyd, just the backup to Josh Jacobs, but if Jacobs misses time or maybe they start to go to more of a committee, can be very valuable. Menengai, kind of the same thing. He has been hurt recently, which is why he's down here, not in the tier up, but I think he's kind of in that same thing as Marshawn Lloyd. Rachaad White, receiving back in the Commanders' backfield, again, injured. A lot of these guys are kind of in the same situations. These are pretty much all handcuffs. A lot of them are in ambiguous backfields, but they're not guys that we think, will necessarily take over, or if they do take over, it's not going to be very good production. Like if Rachaad White is the RB1 in the Commanders offense, it's probably not going to be that, that insane of production to where you're, really excited about it. Whereas Bill Krosky-Merritt, I think, really can provide you solid production if he's the RB1. But then like Tyler Algier, Isaiah Pacheco, both guys that could be kind of more goal line backs or, solid handcuffs to have if one of the lead guys goes down. Tyjae Spears, can he be a thorn in Tony Pollard's side? But after that, it's really guys that you're hoping you can just drop, because like Tyrone Tracy, Chris Rodriguez, Charbonnet, Woody Marks, Dylan Sampson, Alvin Kamara, like none of these guys project to have very big roles nor very high production roles. Chris Rodriguez is slightly intriguing if you happen to be a big Chris Rodriguez fan, which if you are, comment below because you might be the only one. But overall in this tier, like you're probably only looking at some of these top like 10 guys, and you're maybe having to take one of them with your last pick if you're not taking a receiver. So, there's not really a whole lot to talk about here, just a lot of handcuffs, and you're really targeting the offense and maybe the guy who has some receiving or goal line work as well. But it's really a shot in the dark at this point, and it's guys that you'll probably drop less than 4 weeks into the season. And that closes out my running back tiers. Just to kind of reiterate, we use tiers to identify, the best values at the position as well as where the fall-offs in production we project to be. And then tiers 1 and 2 is where we have the really solid running back ones, the guys who are hoping to finish top 3 at the position. Tier 3, still solid RB1s, but probably not as high of a ceiling. But if you get them at your RB2, you're looking really, really good. Tier 3, we have the high-end RB2s who, may have a little bit more of a floor concern, but can still, jump up a tier if they hit. Tier 5 is where we see the pseudo running back dead zone. It's, running back dead zone is kind of a concept that isn't super clear what it is or if it exists year to year, but if there is a dead zone, it's here. It's the guys that, might have a lower floor, but also a little bit of a higher ceiling, and that you need to be really careful about drafting to make sure that they pay off for your team. In tier 6, it's the guys who are, pretty cheap, but can still provide you some high upside or a high floor. These are the guys that you're hoping to hit 1 or 2 of, that if they do, then you probably just got a league winner because they'll be able to produce in a spot where you're drafting them for the bench. In tier 7, pretty much just handcuffs, guys who, if the running back ahead of them goes down, jump into value, but until then, we're not really going to look at playing them. And so that's it. We'll be doing wide receivers and then quarterbacks and tight ends, as well as overall rankings into next week, just in time for your draft. So be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of those videos and the ones that are coming in the season. And be sure to comment. Let me know, what you agree with, what you disagree with. I'm sure there's things that, you either think are right that, maybe you're not seeing other analysts say, or things that you think I'm a complete idiot and I'm going to be wrong on. Please do it. I'd love to have the receipts so that way I'm not the only one getting called out at the end of the season when I'm wrong. Love to see some of you guys be wrong as well. So with that, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.